Hey there, great people. Thanks so much for dialing in. Touching base to let you know that as with all of our content, this is general in nature. It does not take into account your specific or personal circumstances nor your individual risk profile, and as such should not be acted on accordingly. If you get value from this and you want to explore some things further, I strongly recommend that you get personal advice from a qualified professional. Hello and welcome back to the Stash Q&A. This is the series where we grab someone who really knows their stuff and gives you a seat at the table with the kind of expert most people only get to see once things have already gone pear-shaped. Hi, I'm John Manserra from Apex Advice, and today we're talking about something nobody plans for, but a lot of people go through, and that's separation and divorce. Why we're doing this one, we're seeing a lot of couples and individuals, and lately we notice more and more of them are going through a split. What strikes me every time is how much fear there is around it, not just the emotional side, but sheer confusion. What happens first? Do I lose the house? What about the kids? Do I need to lawyer up and go to war? So today we're pulling back the curtain with an expert. My guest is someone who really does this for a living and does it brilliantly. Skye Wylde from Wylde Family Law. We're going to demystify how it actually works, bust a few big myths along the way, and hopefully take some scary part out of it for you. Quick heads up before we start. This is general information only. It's not personal advice for your situation. Righto, on with the show. Hello and welcome, Skye Wylde from Wylde Family Law. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Lovely to speak with you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So for the folks meeting you for the first time, Skye, I'm hoping you can just give us a little bit about your origin story, where you started, how you fell into family law as a specialty.
Absolutely. Wylde Family Law is a boutique family law practice. We have an office in Melbourne, Geelong, and also Torquay recently. A little bit of a background about me. So I've always been involved in family law. That's always been a bit of a special interest for me, but I do have the benefit of working in other areas as well, commercial law, wills and estates, which some people call the law for dead people, or family law for dead people, and other areas as well. But I always came back to family law and then certainly begin to develop expertise in that area.
Yeah, well done. There is one piece of practice of law that's more morbid than divorce, but that'd be estate law.
Yeah,
death law.
yeah.
So what pulled you into family law specifically and piqued your interest there?
Yeah. So I think ultimately anyone that's had any sort of interaction with this system before knows firsthand how challenging that is. So I genuinely see it as such a great privilege and honor to be able to navigate that system with people. So that I take a lot of pride in that. That really fills my cup and be able to help people through arguably one of the most challenging points in their life. So it's really that human connection and that human element that brings me back to this area of practice.
Yeah, great. Not just a number on a page, but you're dealing with real people and real situations. And I was thinking as getting prepped for this, but you often, like you said, you're dealing with people at their lowest point or potentially at the worst day of the year when they've had the courage to reach out to you. When someone first reaches out to you, what's sort of process from there? What are they typically feeling?
Yeah. Look, I think it varies, but I think the common theme for a lot of people is the fear of the unknown and that level of uncertainty, which I think is a biological factor that we all have that we've developed to keep us safe. So it makes complete sense. But I think certainly there's a lot of discussion in social groups and online about the worst case scenarios. And people really come to me with that innate fear that this is going to happen to me. So I think certainly that's how a lot of people present. And again, just going back to why I do this is, wow, what an opportunity to be able to actually set the record straight here, get rid of some of that fear and develop a really clear pathway for them moving forward.
Yeah, love that. And when it comes to this fear concept or that people are feeling, do you generally find it's a fear of the unknown, fear of unknown around cost, or fear of losing access to the kids? What do you find the number one thing is that
He's fearful.
Everything. So I think cost is a huge factor as well, because there's also that rhetoric out there, and you can tell me if you've got a different view, of course, but there's this rhetoric out there that lawyers are going to charge you as much as possible. They're really expensive hourly rates. They want to take everything to court so they can maximize the billables and things like that. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that all lawyers don't practice like that, because that's just not true. However, I think the majority do try and do a really good job and try and avoid the court process and try to help people navigate this commercially. And that's certainly the approach that we take. So I think cost is a huge factor in that. And what I would say to that is that it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be a protracted legal battle where it is tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes it will get to that, and we can certainly canvass that and map that out. But that's really ends of the spectrum kind of thing. The majority of cases don't end there. Yeah. And then otherwise, in terms of, I think anything to do with parenting, it's the most important thing in your life, your children. So if there's rhetoric out there, or there's an assumption that you're not going to be spending time with them or enough time with them, of course, that's going to be very stressful and very uncertain. So I think those probably primarily are the two main things. And then the last one would be for a financial settlement is, how am I going to live once this settlement goes through? Am I going to have access to funds? Am I going to have to retrain and go back to work? Or am I going to have to pay my partner a level of support for a period of time, which I don't know how I'm going to come up with. So it's really multifactorial.
Yeah, and there's a lot that goes into this, and it can often feel like a bit of a black box. So I'm hopeful we can demystify a few things around the process and the ins and outs of it today. So trying to clear up some confusion first is terms like divorce, property settlement, parenting arrangements. People thinking that's all one and the same, but really my understanding is they're separate things. Can you walk us through it?
Absolutely. And this is such a good point. And I think reality TV and TV from the US really doesn't help this either, because our systems are very different. But in essence, divorce is completely a separate process to everything. And I often say to people, look, getting divorced is actually really quite straightforward. It's a procedural matter. You go from married to not married anymore, so long as you can meet the legislative requirements, which are quite simple, which we can talk about later if we have time. But so long as you meet those requirements, that's the end of it, okay? Then we have a property settlement. That's dividing capital and assets, and perhaps liabilities, divvying those up as well and making sure that they're accounted for. Then we have a parenting arrangement or parenting proceedings if it comes to that. And that's basically putting some plans in place to make sure that the children have the best arrangements for them moving forward. And there's the main areas that we look at in family law, all very separate. You can do one, you don't have to do the other. You've got lots of different options. And look, some people will start with a property settlement, they'll maybe do their divorce, and they might not need assistance with parenting. So that's also an option as well.
Okay, so it's a bit plug and play. You can access these agreements and settlements as required. Yeah, cool.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Cool. So talking about actual steps, right? So tomorrow we decide to separate, someone reaches out to you. What happens next, and what sort of order?
Yeah, so we offer a completely complimentary, no obligation, it's okay if you never want to speak to me again or my team again, consultation. Now, that consultation, I always say to people, the earlier you can get that advice, the better. And sometimes, whilst it's a bit morbid to have those discussions pre-separation, it's really the best thing you can be doing to make sure you know exactly where you stand, what are your rights, what are your obligations, what are you looking at, okay? So that's that initial consultation. You can book that online, you can call us, you can email us, there's lots of different ways. But what we do is we first figure out what you actually need, because there's no point me rattling on about the Family Law Act and about this agreement, that agreement, if it's not relevant to you. So we tailor it to what is the strategy we need for you as an individual to meet your priorities, get you where you need to be, and do so cost effectively. And certainly if there's children involved, do it amicably, right? Because you're going to be co-parenting, I tell people, for the next 10, 20, 15 years, realistically. So we don't need to be at loggerheads just because we're separated and we need to finalise things.
Good. That's good common sense advice. I hear that. Do it amicably and do it in a way that suits your circumstances. So no one story is the same. So when does the concept of separation officially start?
Yeah.
And do you have to move out for it to be separated, in talking marks?
I love this question, and it's such a good question, and it's one that comes up so often. And I think the reason why it's sometimes a bit elusive is because it's so simple. What separation is one person communicating to the other, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. Okay. And it's that simple. Doesn't necessarily have to occur in writing, but as a lawyer, I'm always going to say put it in writing so there's no ambiguity. But it's one person communicating to the other. There doesn't need to be agreement. And in fact, we have situations, which I suppose is not super uncommon given sort of the nature of what we deal with, where two very reasonable people might have very different interpretations of what the date of separation is, okay? And subject to the facts of that case, it might actually have no bearing whatsoever. So if you were thinking about separating, my advice would be put it in writing after you've had a discussion maybe, just so we have a clear point in time.
Okay. And maybe an email or a text as opposed to a handwritten note.
Yes.
With no
Yes.
copies.
That's right. We want it time and date stamped, preferably. Thank you.
And so in theory, we can be separated and still living under the same roof, and there's no issue there.
Absolutely. And look, technically that is absolutely available to you to be doing. And I think just with the cost of living and the economy at present, that's becoming a lot more common.
Yes. Yep.
And then I think it's also becoming a lot more common because I think a lot of parents are getting more equipped with what's in the best interest of the children if there are children. And some people are adopting what we call a nesting arrangement, where we've separated, the children remain in the home, but instead of the children moving back and forth between the parental homes, the children stay in the matrimonial home, and it's the parents that are moving back and forward. So over the last 10, 15 years, that has been a real change in my practice that we have seen becoming so much more common. What I would say to people that are considering separating under the one roof is that it can work really well, but it also can be quite fraught with danger, especially if we have high tensions. And the last thing you want to do is create an acrimonious sort of departure and police involvement and things like that in those worst case scenarios. So what I would be saying to you in that instance is just get some advice. We can brainstorm that with you. We can strategize and we can figure out if that is the best thing for you.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's interesting, right? So the concept of there's economic factors at play causing us to co-nest, and then there's what's best for the family. So it's a very interesting point you make, Skye. There's this magic number we all hear of 12 months. What's the significance of 12 months?
Yes, this is the limitation period, and it's often phrased as very scary. And look, it's certainly something you should be aware of, but not scared of. It's just another factor that we need to factor into the timeline of events. But what you're referring to is you have 12 months from the date a divorce order becomes effective to file proceedings in the family court to seek a property division. If you don't do so within that 12 months, you do have to seek special leave of the court to bring proceedings out of time. But in circumstances where you might have joint property and intermingling of finances, and we've got a really long relationship or something like that, whilst I'm not going to say this is always going to be the case, of course, and the caveat here is you need tailored advice, but the likelihood is that a court would grant leave in those circumstances, but that's not going to be applicable to anyone, okay? So you certainly need to get some advice once that divorce order is made. And then interestingly, and perhaps less well known, there's also a limitation period for de facto couples. So yes, and that's actually 24 months from the date of separation. You have to then file proceedings in the family court for a property division. So 12 months for divorce and married couples, and then 24 months for de facto.
Okay. Yeah. Good. And just when my mind goes toward divorce, I think of the movie Wedding Crashers and Owen Wilson and Vince Vaughn are mediating people in a room, and there's a lot of smooth, fast talking and arguments over the table. So I think most people picture that, or maybe a courtroom with a judge, the whole sort of drama shebang. How often does it actually end up there?
Yes. Look, 95% of cases don't go to court. And then those that actually do go to court, the majority settle typically somewhere in between the court proceedings. Very few will actually go to a trial where you ultimately have that judge making a decision about how everything is divided up or what arrangements that are going to be in place for the children. So the answer to that very briefly is not very often. However, we do have a lot of things at our disposal prior to issuing court proceedings, such as mediation or roundtable conferences, or certainly negotiations back and forth, where there will be at times some pretty lively debate about the merits of a case and the adjustment factors in a property settlement and things like that. And that's when you really do need a very competent and savvy lawyer to maximise those arguments on your behalf, whilst also trying to remain amicable and not really do your dash, so to speak.
Yeah, we don't want to blame things, but you certainly got to stand up at times as well. So the other paths, if most matters settle without a judge, the other paths we're talking about mediation, negotiating, family dispute, that sort of stuff, and that's generally done through lawyers and a mediator. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's right. But there are other options as well. So a lot of the people that we speak to at that initial point when they're engaging us, a lot of them will get some advice and then go away and exercise some other strategies that we'll speak about. And then they'll re-engage us once they've exhausted that and they come back. So there genuinely is so many different options for people to consider.
Okay, good. Realistically, like for a standard vanilla sort of situation, how long does the process typically take just for a fairly ordinary sort of split?
Yeah, this one's harder to answer because I suppose what's ordinary really, and things just, there's so many variables. People have different priorities, people have different jobs. What I always say to my clients is that if everyone is very motivated to resolve this and comes to the table and gives us the material that we need and we can make an offer of settlement as soon as possible to resolve things, it could take a month.
Yep. Okay.
But the reality is, I think that's happened once in my 15 years.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's so many moving parts and it's obviously the very nature of it. It's a huge decisions that you're making. So people naturally want some time to consider their options, consider advice, and then move through it like that. On average, in our practice, we're probably looking at around 3 to 6 months if everyone is motivated to resolve everything. Okay. And that's including all the court filing, the court to review, which can take some 6 to 8 weeks at times. And then other cases, if you are issuing court proceedings, those court proceedings will take time because the court is very busy and there's a lot of cases. Whilst the majority settle, there are still a lot of cases that go through that court system. You're probably looking maybe a year to 18 months in court proceedings, which realistically has to be a factor that you're considering if you're looking at all of your options.
Yeah, you're right. And there's so many variables, right? Like the asset pool, the kids, their incomes, these sorts of things, and living arrangements and so forth. So it's not black and white, unfortunately. Yeah. And I'm sure you see it all. So that's good. And just the plain English definition, if you will, but the difference between a consent order and a binding financial agreement, what is the difference?
Yeah, so look, both operate with the same functionality, and that is to sever the financial relationship and to make enforceable terms for the property settlement. So you keep what's yours, I keep what's mine, we divide this up, we go our separate ways, and then there's a line in the sand, okay? So both effectively do that, but through very different mechanisms. So your consent order, you're leaning into the jurisdiction of the court and you're saying, we know we could have the matter ultimately decided by a trial judge, but we've instead reached agreement between ourselves. Here's all the information that you need, and would you please make this order that we're seeking? Okay, so you walk away with the court order, which as the law presently stands is the best thing that you can be getting to sever the financial relationship and create that certainty moving forward. The other option, a financial agreement or a binding financial agreement, It's a private contract between you and your ex. It's where you're saying, we know we can go to the court to have it decided whether by consent or through a litigation process, but we're instead going to enter into this private contract together to deal with our property settlement, and we'll effectively exclude that jurisdiction. So they both do the same thing through very different mechanisms. Binding financial agreements, there's a whole section in the legislation which is all the reasons and ways in which they can be set aside by a court. So they need to be drafted really well by a lawyer that does this day in, day out, because if it's not, the likelihood is that it could be set aside if it's contested down the tracks. I could talk about it all day, but broadly speaking, they're the two differences. And we would use different ones depending upon the strategy for that individual case.
Yeah, and it sounds like a consent order is a bit more foolproof maybe, or a bit more
Often.
nail it to the wall. Yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
and they're better for the client because they're more cost effective for me to draft, because I don't have to deal with a whole section of the Act which is saying you've got to do every single thing like this, otherwise there's scope for it to be set aside. So they're cheap, they're cheaper, more cost effective, and they're the best protection. So that's often what we do.
Okay, cool. Very good. And when you use the term property, you're talking about physical property or all the asset pool?
We're talking about everything.
Yeah.
So the Family Law Act has power to consider every asset and every liability, regardless of the sort of, which includes superannuation, which sometimes comes as a little bit of a surprise to people. I think you would know this, John, in your work. I think a lot of people just think, oh, set and forget, that's super, that's sitting in the background, but it's an asset and it will be considered in the overall development and settlement of a matter.
Yeah, great. So the term property doesn't extend to the house with a front yard, backyard. We're talking about shares and super and businesses and so forth. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. Great. Now let's just say in the strange world where the couple have agreed to everything between themselves, do they still need to get a lawyer involved?
Yeah. I really like this question as well, because the short answer is no, but if you want to make sure that you are completely protected and that there can be no claims against your property moving forward, it is essential that you do either a consent order or a binding financial agreement. Now, technically, you could do a consent order without a lawyer, but I haven't seen many be able to get through because there's lots of requirements that you need to be able to satisfy the court that it should be made as an order. So what I would say is, my advice would be everyone gets advice early, and then if you reach agreement between yourselves without the assistance of a lawyer, well done. But then take it to a lawyer, get them to draft it properly, and then file that way. The worst thing you could do would be to shake hands, divide everything up, and walk away. So the reason being, and look, I love insurances. I love making sure that I protect my future as much as possible. You can think of a consent order as the best insurance premium you'll ever pay in your life, in my opinion.
Good terminology. You're in the right space. So the back of the beer coaster doesn't count with a pen. We're not we can divvy things up that way. No, I think that makes sense. And people can change their minds and viewpoints in future as well. So I think it's good to get it done properly.
Yeah.
If you're gonna do it properly. Yeah.
That's right. And lives change, priorities change, people repartner, people maybe have more children. So you might be very much on the same page at this point in time, but is that going to be the case in 10, 15, 20 years? Probably not.
Yeah, and we don't want to dredge up things back then. I think one that I particularly like your version around the process for you around a no obligation consult. I think it breaks down barriers and helps people just information gather when they're maybe vulnerable and feeling vulnerable and that sort of stuff. I just thought like a high level proxy, not going to pin you to the wall, but one around money and the pricing of stuff. Like what's a proxy for what the process might cost and what can drive numbers up and down?
Yeah. And this is a very important question and not something that I could say it's going to cost X, because there are just too many variables. What someone would be needing for a property in a parenting matter is going to be different for a very high property net pool, right?
Yep.
Or someone's parenting proceedings are going to potentially, if it's really acrimonious, are going to cost a lot more than both potentially. And then there's also other interventions that we can be doing before we start being retained by the individual. So there's lots of different avenues that they can go down to before they then come back to us to get further assistance. So there's just far too many variables. But what your lawyer should be doing is actually speaking to you first, understanding exactly what you need and what your family needs, and then creating the fee structure to cater to that and giving you options. If your lawyer's not doing that, you need to get a second opinion, because that's the minimum that they should be doing.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you for that. Now, I was at the local footy on the weekend talking to a few old mates and going through this process, and you hear a lot of myths and wives' tales about separation. So I thought it'd be good, just rapid fire, see if we can bust a few. If I just throw a few things that you can just tell me whether it's true or rubbish, and we can give a little bit of a why and try and keep it snappy. So the first one in my mind's eye is everything gets split right down the middle, 50-50. Myth. Why?
Because there's variables, and that's a lawyer's favorite thing to say.
It's very dynamic.
But there's variables, and there's a whole sections of the Act which deal with those variables, which is why you need that expert advice to be able to tell you with certainty, this is what you're looking at in terms of division.
I'm with you. There's no automatic split. What about mum always gets the kids?
Myth. Big myth. Big myth. And I think that creates, we were speaking earlier about that uncertainty and fear. That comes from that if I actually try to pursue this, I'm not going to win anyway, right? So get advice, have a chat to someone who knows what they're talking about, because it's not always that way at all. There's so many other factors that come into play.
Brilliant. If we're not married, so I've got no rights and they've got no claim to my stuff.
Myth. So de factos in Australia have almost entirely reciprocal rights and obligations than married people. So there really isn't a huge difference in that. So no, don't be under that illusion that you're protected or you don't have rights. You certainly do, and get some advice.
Yeah, okay, good. In the situation where my ex has done the wrong thing and maybe drifted away or cheated, I'll get more in the settlement, I'll get looked after more.
Yeah, myth. So we have a handy thing brought, I think 1975 was brought in, no fault divorce in Australia. Okay. So effectively it means that you could be a really rotten person, but it will not have a bearing on the way things pan out. The only caveat to that, however, is if there is family violence and it's in evidence effectively, that's an adjusting factor potentially in a property settlement, but very niche area, you need tailored advice for that.
Yeah, nice. Good to know that one. No fault divorce. I have to wait until the property and the kids are sorted before I can get divorced?
No, you don't. So myth. So as long as you can tell the court that there's appropriate arrangements for the children when you're applying for that divorce, you can get divorced from 12 months from the date of separation.
I'm with you. Very good. That's enough myth busting for today. Just from where you sit, what are the money mistakes people make in the heat of a separation where it ends up costing them for years afterwards?
So it's the psychology of it all. So it's not maintaining a commercial mindset because you're going through a really hard time, which is human, it's a human experience. Separation is a human experience. So what I say to people is, you're okay. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel devastated. But what I want you to do is feel that. And let's also take a commercial mindset so we can actually make sure we're looking after you, maintaining a relationship to the extent that you need to, i.e. for co-parenting purposes. And we're involved in their lives for this amount of time. They've got to deal with their ex for this amount of time. So let's not blow it all up now and leave you to deal with the pieces once I'm long gone. Let's take a really commercial approach. Let's be sensible. Let's be to the point, because we're ultimately looking after your well-being now, not waiting for it all to fall apart later.
Yeah, what a great answer. It is hard to stay composed when the stakes are high. I feel high, so I understand what you're saying there. So back to this super concept. You alluded to it before that it is on the table. How does it get split or treated?
Yeah. So superannuation is fascinating, and I could talk about it all day, but I won't. I'll try and be simple with it. But in very long relationships, the tendency is to equalize superannuation. Now, that is not a foregone conclusion. So you really do need tailored advice, of course, but it is not uncommon in very long relationships for that entitlement to be equalized, meaning someone's super goes into the other person's super, so they have the same amount.
Yes, special rollover. And when should someone, when they are separating, get other professionals like a financial advisor in the room with their lawyer? And do you think that combination matters?
It is critical because, as I said earlier, as a lawyer, I'm involved in your life for this, and my job is this. You need support everywhere else, and we need to make sure that you've got those strategies and those people in your corner that are assisting you in that way. So just like with legal advice, get that early. So I want you to have a financial planner. I want you to have an accountant. I want you to have a psychologist most of the time as well, because this is bloody hard stuff. So get them involved, because then when I'm looking at modeling in terms of property divisions and what your life looks like following this separation, they are the best people to speak to model that for you and say, well, don't worry about this asset, we'll get rid of that, but we need this income stream, or we need that, we need this. And that is critical, arguably one of the most, if not the most important aspect.
Yeah, and it helps give people a sense that they'll be okay beyond the split too, I think, if you get that part right. So that's really good.
Yeah.
More to the human side and specifically kids. This area I think would keep people up at night just in terms of what's going to happen moving forward. So how does the law actually decide what's going to happen with the kiddies and so forth?
Yes. The primary consideration under the Family Law Act for a judge when making a decision is what arrangements are in the best interests of the children. So that is the primary consideration. Everything has to move around that. And I often tell people parents don't have rights under the Family Law Act. They instead have obligations. And their obligations are to ensure, so long as it's safe to do so, that their children have a meaningful relationship with both parents. Okay, so that is the framework, and everything else fits around that framework. And that's ultimately what will be the deciding factor. We then have other considerations such as the practicality of the arrangements that are proposed. If you're proposing a shared care arrangement when we've got 3 hours round trip travel each day for the children, that's not in their best interest. It's not reasonably practical. So going through all of those factors as just an example is realistically what your lawyer should be doing with you to try to put a proposal together for what arrangements should look like.
Yeah, that's great. It gives us an idea of what best interest in the child means in real terms, doesn't it? Instead of just legal as well. So for the parent that might be terrified losing access to kids, what do you want them to know?
Just reach out, get some advice. You're not alone. You have a lot of support. You have a lot of options. So take control of the situation, get some advice, and give yourself some agency to make some informed decisions. And what I would say is that there is a lot of misinformation out there. And look, people are often doing it because they're coming from a good place. They're trying to warn people of what can happen. But a lot of the time it's not relevant, and it's just going to make you feel more fearful. So please reach out, get some advice. We'll create a pathway for you.
Yeah, nice. And if someone's listening to this, maybe they're on the fence, sensing things aren't right, but scared to make a move, what's your advice or the smallest step they could take?
I think probably have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea first. in self-interest, jump on our website, book an initial consultation. You don't have to speak to a human. All right. That's sometimes a barrier. Picking up the phone and speaking to someone is sometimes a barrier. Book online. You'll speak to a friendly face. We'll develop a pathway, and we can put it all together. We can give you some options. I think do that. And then I'm a big proponent of therapy, psychology, counselling, because ultimately we're entering a different phase of life and what life looks like when you separate. Being together and co-parenting are two very different things, but also if there aren't children, it's a very different phase of life than perhaps what you were imagining. So what I really want them to do is look after themselves, because they're the priority here, but also work with someone who can hopefully develop some strategies to make this process a little bit easier.
Great. Yeah, really good. What about, some of this sounds a bit morbid, but what's the best part of your job, like a moment when you know you've genuinely had an impact or helped someone?
At risk of sounding cliche, it's the best thing I do. It is helping people when they are in arguably the most challenging point of their life, and then speaking to them
Yep.
once it's all wrapped up. And what's happened is what you told them would happen in the initial conference, and they have that relief knowing that they can start this next chapter of their life with that behind them and some certainty. I don't think there's many things that could be that rewarding from a professional perspective. It is truly a joy to assist people, and hence why I established this business, so I could make sure that we were doing it the way that they ought to be serviced effectively.
Brilliant. Yeah, and you're just affording everyone peace of mind, aren't you, in a crappy time? And where can people just help us understand where they can find out more about you and Wylde Family Law? What's the best places to go?
Yeah, website. Look, the website's a great place to start. As I said, you can book online, you can get our email, give us a call, LinkedIn if you want. We're on all the platforms, but I think bite the bullet, just make an initial consultation, and then, see how you go from there. That would be my advice.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Skye, for taking the time out of your day to chat to us about this stuff. Just a reminder to everyone, this is general info, not personal advice. So definitely we recommend seeking personal advice, whether it's on the money side or the legal side of this. And make sure you reach out to Wylde Family Law if you want to have a no obligation chat. Thanks, Skye.
Thanks, John. Lovely chatting.
Easy. Thanks so much to Skye. That was genuinely useful. And I reckon a lot of people listening are breathing a little easier already. If there's one thing you take away, it's this: the picture in your head of the courtroom brawl is not how most people end here. The numbers back it up. More than 7 in 10 people sort their arrangements out themselves, and only a tiny fraction ever have a judge decide it for them. The process has moved from fighting it out to sorting it out, and knowing that alone takes a lot of the fear away. If you're going through this, or you can see it coming soon, get the right people in your corner early is what I took out of Skye's session. Skye and the team at Wylde Family Law, they're brilliant from the legal side, and we highly recommend reaching out to them if you need help. You can find Skye at Wylde Family Law, and if you want to talk through the financial side of a separation, or honestly any big money decision, you're very welcome to reach out. Thanks so much for taking your time. Take care.